I still remember the exact moment my body started sending warning signals my mind refused to hear. 3 months into my dream job, I found myself locked in a bathroom stall at Meridian Publishing, breathing into cupped hands while my stomach twisted into knots. 20 minutes until the morning staff meeting. 20 minutes to pull myself together. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss, Claire. "Where are you? Need those numbers before everyone arrives." The stomach aches had become my daily alarm clock, more reliable than the actual one on my nightstand. At first, I blamed my diet, my morning coffee, the stress of a new position. Anything but the truth, that my body was sounding an alarm my pride wouldn't let me acknowledge. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and straightened my blazer. "You've got this," I whispered to my reflection. "This is what making it looks like." The woman in the mirror looked less convinced than I wanted her to be. 6 months earlier, when Claire had called to offer me the senior editor position, I'd nearly dropped my phone from excitement. Meridian was the publisher everyone in the industry wanted to work for, and Claire Davidson was a legend, the woman who had transformed a struggling company into a powerhouse in just 4 years. Working directly under her would be like a masterclass in publishing. At least, that's what I told myself when I accepted the job and the modest salary that came with it. The prestige would be worth it. The experience would be priceless. No one mentioned the cost would be my health, my relationships, and eventually, almost my life. My first day had been a parade of red flags I expertly ignored. Claire was 40 minutes late to our onboarding meeting, then rushed through it while answering emails on her phone. "The last person in your position couldn't handle the pace," she mentioned casually. "But your references were stellar, so I'm optimistic." By week 2, I understood what the pace meant. 6 a.m. emails expecting immediate responses. Midnight texts with urgent tasks for the next morning. Weekend work that wasn't explicitly mandated but clearly expected. When I mentioned the hours during our first check-in, Claire's response chilled me. "If you're counting hours, Jessica, publishing might not be the right fit for you. We're a family here, we do whatever it takes." I nodded and smiled. Publishing was notoriously competitive, and I had beaten out dozens of qualified candidates for this position. I wasn't about to seem ungrateful, or worse, lazy. I could handle it. I would prove myself worthy. That morning, 3 months in, I made it to the conference room with 2 minutes to spare, printouts in hand and digital presentation ready. Claire barely looked up when I entered. "Nice of you to join us," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My cheeks burned as I took my seat, the stomachache intensifying. I had no way of knowing then that this was just the beginning, that in 6 months, I would be in an emergency room with my body in full rebellion, while my phone lit up with Claire's name, demanding to know why I had missed the quarterly planning meeting. No way of knowing that what I thought was ambition was actually abuse, or that what I believed was paying my dues was actually costing me everything. The morning meeting was a bloodbath. Not for me, not that day at least, but for Tyler, our marketing coordinator. He had prepared a comprehensive social media strategy for our upcoming major release, something he'd been working on for weeks. I'd seen him staying late, his desk lamp the only light in the office most evenings. "This is what you've spent 3 weeks on." Claire's voice had that dangerous silky quality I'd come to recognize as the calm before the storm. My 15-year-old niece could have put together something more innovative over a weekend. The conference room fell silent. 20 professionals suddenly became deeply interested in their notepads or coffee cups. Nobody made eye contact with Tyler or each other. I follow the brand guidelines we established last quarter," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. "And the engagement metrics from our test campaigns show." "The metrics show mediocrity," Claire cut in, standing now. "If mediocrity is what you're aiming for, you've hit the target. Congratulations." She tossed his printed presentation across the table, pages scattering. "Start over. I need something that doesn't put our audience to sleep by Friday." Friday was 2 days away. Tyler nodded, gathering his papers with shaking hands. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, the shameful, selfish relief of not being the target, followed immediately by guilt. I should say something. Defend him. The strategy was solid, Claire was being unreasonable. But my mouth stayed firmly shut, my eyes fixed on my notebook where I'd written "speak up" and then crossed it out. Later, In the break room, I approached Tyler. "Hey, I thought your presentation was really good," I offered lamely. He gave me a tired smile. "Thanks. Just another Tuesday with Hurricane Claire." He lowered his voice. "You know what kills me? Last month, she told me to be more conservative with our approach after Ryan's campaign took too many risks. Now I'm too boring." He shook his head. "No winning. That was the thing about working for Claire, the target was always moving. Excellence wasn't defined by quality or results, but by her mood on any given day. We were all constantly calibrating, adjusting, trying to read her unpredictable winds. I developed a whole system for Claire management. I tracked her coffee intake, more than 3 by noon meant trouble, monitored which executives had visited her office, the CFO always put her in a foul mood, and kept a mental calendar of her personal life, events from snippets of overheard phone conversations. Anything to help me predict and prepare for her next explosion. When my phone buzzed with a text from Claire that afternoon, "My office. Now." My heart rate doubled instantly. Walking that short hallway to her office felt like approaching an unexploded bomb. What had I done wrong? Was it the quarterly report numbers? The author I'd recommended for the new imprint? The email I'd sent to the design team without copying her? Claire was typing furiously when I entered, not looking up. "Close the door," she said. I did, then stood awkwardly, waiting to be invited to sit. The invitation never came. "Jessica," she finally said, still looking at her screen, "I need you to take over Tyler's social campaign." My stomach dropped. In addition to the Frankfurt Book Fair preparations, I was already working until midnight most days to get everything ready for the industry's biggest event. Now she looked up, one perfectly shaped eyebrow raised. "Is that a problem?" There it was, the trap. Say yes, it's a problem, and be labeled as someone who couldn't handle the pace. Say no, and add another impossible task to my already crushing workload. "No problem at all," I said, my voice steady while my insides quivered. "I'll connect with Tyler right away." Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's why you're my star, Jessica. You don't make excuses. Unlike some people." She waved her hand dismissively. "I knew I could count on you." As I turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and I'll need to see a draft by tomorrow morning. I have an executive breakfast I want to bring it to." Tomorrow morning. The impossible deadline dropped like a guillotine. I nodded, already calculating the all-nighter ahead of me, already feeling the familiar tightness in my chest, already knowing I would do it somehow because in Claire's world, I can't, simply wasn't an option. That night, as I worked at my kitchen table surrounded by empty coffee cups, my roommate Kate paused on her way to bed. "Jess, it's 1 a.m. This is the 3rd night this week. Big deadline." I mumbled, not looking up from my laptop. "Every deadline is big with her," Kate said. "When was the last time you got more than 5 hours of sleep?" I couldn't remember. Sleep, like friends, family, dating, exercise, and proper meals, had become a luxury I couldn't afford. My world had shrunk to the space between my apartment and the office, with Claire's expectations filling every inch between. "I'm fine," I insisted. "Just need to get through this launch season." Kate lingered in the doorway. "That's what you said last season. And the one before that." She hesitated. "We haven't had dinner together in weeks. I miss my friend." The guilt stabbed at me, but I pushed it away. "I'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise." We both knew it was a lie. My weekends belonged to Claire, too. Everything did. At 4:37 a.m., I sent the completed draft to Claire, set my alarm for 6:30, and collapsed fully clothed onto my bed. As I drifted into unconsciousness, my phone buzzed with her response. "This is a good start. Let's meet at 7 to refine." 3 hours of work, 17 minutes of sleep. I stared at the ceiling, tears of exhaustion welling in my eyes, and wondered how long I could keep this up. The answer, though I didn't know it then, was exactly 2 more months before my body made the decision my mind couldn't make on its own. The Frankfurt Book Fair presentation was a success, or at least that's what everyone said. I couldn't actually remember much of it. I delivered my part on automatic pilot, running on caffeine and adrenaline after 3 days of minimal sleep. Claire had changed the requirements 4 times in the 48 hours before our departure, requiring complete overhauls each time. By the time we boarded the plane to Germany, I was already operating in a fog. What I do remember clearly was the aftermath. We were at the publisher's cocktail reception, surrounded by industry elites. I was nursing a sparkling water, trying to stay alert, when I overheard Claire talking to the CEO of Penguin Random House. "My team has been absolutely killing it this year," she was saying, arm casually draped over my shoulder as if we were old friends. "Jessica here is my rising star. The Frankfurt presentation, all her. I just guide the vision, but she executes flawlessly." I froze, glass halfway to my lips. It was the first compliment Claire had given me in months, and it wasn't even directed at me. It was a performance for someone important, someone she wanted to impress. The realization made me feel hollow inside. Later that night, riding the elevator to our hotel rooms, Claire's mask slipped back into place. "That PowerPoint transition in slide 14 was sloppy," she said, examining her nails. "And you stumbled over the Nielsen numbers. We need to tighten that up before London." The praise from earlier evaporated, leaving only the criticism behind. I nodded mutely, too exhausted to defend myself. "Oh, and I need you to rework the entire European strategy section by tomorrow morning," she added as the elevator doors opened. The CEO's comments made me realize our approach is too conservative. "But that's the entire second half of the presentation," I said, unable to keep the dismay from my voice. "And we have meetings scheduled all day tomorrow." Claire turned to me, her expression hardening. "You know, Jessica, I've been singing your praises to everyone who'll listen. I've really gone out on a limb for you. If you're not up for this level of work, perhaps I've misrepresented your capabilities." The threat was clear. Disagree, and she'd make sure everyone knew I wasn't as good as she claimed. My reputation in the industry, the thing I'd sacrificed my health and personal life for, would be damaged before it was even established. "I'll have it ready," I said quietly. "That's my girl," she replied with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. I worked until 4 a.m. in my hotel room, ordered room service that sat untouched as I typed frantically, and showed up to the morning meeting with a revised strategy, complete with new market analysis I'd cobbled together from research reports I'd accessed through our company portal. Claire flipped through it casually before the meeting, nodded once, and then presented it as if she created it herself. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt nothing. The numbness had become my constant companion, a protective shell against disappointment and hurt. I couldn't afford emotions anymore. They took up energy I needed for survival. Back in New York, things got worse. Claire had tasted success in Frankfurt, attributed largely to work I'd done, and she wanted more. My workload doubled. My health deteriorated. The stomach aches evolved into full-blown IBS. I started losing weight, 10 pounds, then 15. My clothes hung loose, but I had no time to shop for new ones. "You look tired," my mother said during our monthly FaceTime call. "Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine, Mom," I lied. "Just busy season at work." "Every season seems to be busy season," she observed, concern evident in her voice. "When was the last time you came home for a weekend?" I couldn't remember. Holidays, birthdays, my niece's dance recital. I'd missed them all because of urgent work that somehow always fell on days I'd requested off. The few times I did make it to family events, I spent most of the time answering Claire's texts or stepping away for quick calls that turned into hour-long work sessions. My social circle had shrunk to almost nothing. Friends stopped inviting me places because I always canceled. Dating was out of the question. Who would want to compete with a job that demanded every waking hour? Even Kate, my roommate, had grown distant, tired of living with a ghost who came home late and left early. The isolation wasn't just happening outside the office. Within Meridian, I'd noticed a growing coldness from colleagues. What I didn't realize until later was that Claire had been systematically turning people against me. "Watch out for Jessica," she'd tell the design team. "She's brilliant, but very particular about her work. She complained about your last layouts." To the marketing team, "Jessica thinks your copy needs significant improvement, but I defended you." To the executive team, "Jessica's perfectionism is slowing down the Eastern region launch, but I'm managing it." None of it was true, but the damage was done. Coworkers who had once been friendly became distant, thinking I'd criticized them behind their backs. I couldn't understand why everyone seemed to be pulling away until Tyler, who was leaving for another job, finally told me what was happening. "She does it to everyone she sees as a threat," he explained during his goodbye happy hour, an event Claire notably didn't attend. Isolates them. Makes them dependent on her approval because everyone else has been turned against them. Classic abuser tactic. I'm not a threat to Claire, I said, confused. I'm just doing my job. You're doing it too well, he replied. And people notice. The executive team mentions you in meetings. Authors ask for you specifically. That makes her insecure, so she has to control you. Keep you close, but also keep you dependent. I wanted to deny it, but the pieces fit too perfectly. The random cruelty followed by unexpected praise. The public humiliation and private confidences. The way she took credit for my successes but blamed me for her failures. The systematic isolation from colleagues and the impossible expectations that kept me too busy and exhausted to build alliances. What do? I asked, feeling trapped. Tyler looked at me with pity. You leave, Jess. Like I'm doing. Before there's nothing left of you. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I'd sacrificed too much to walk away before I had something to show for it. I needed the full year on my resume at minimum. I needed Claire's recommendation. I needed to prove I could handle it. I just need to get through the next few months. I told myself that night, swallowing another antacid as I prepared for bed. Then I'll look for something else. My body, however, had reached its breaking point. 2 weeks later, during a particularly brutal meeting where Claire systematically dismantled a proposal I'd spent weeks preparing, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. The room seemed suddenly too bright, voices too loud, air too thin. Jessica, are you even listening? Claire's irritated voice seemed to come from very far away. I asked you a question. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, my vision tunneled to pinpoints, my heart raced uncontrollably, and I couldn't catch my breath. The last thing I remember was Claire's annoyed face as the room tilted sideways and everything went black. I was having my first panic attack right in the middle of the Monday morning executive meeting. But it wouldn't be my last. Anxiety attack, the ER doctor told me matter-of-factly. Your blood pressure is through the roof, and your cortisol levels are what I'd expect to see in someone who just survived a car crash. I was lying on a hospital bed, still in my work clothes, and 4 in my arm replacing the fluids I'd lost after vomiting in the conference room bathroom. One of the junior editors had driven me to the emergency room after finding me hunched over the toilet, unable to stand without getting dizzy. Has this happened before? The doctor asked, reviewing my chart. Not like this, I admitted. I've had some stomach aches, trouble sleeping. Nothing serious. She looked at me over her glasses. Your body would disagree. These symptoms didn't appear overnight. How long have you been experiencing chronic stress? I shrugged, uncomfortable with her directness. Work has been busy. It's just the nature of the industry. Ms. Roberts, I've treated Wall Street traders, ER surgeons, and air traffic controllers. I understand high-pressure jobs. What you're experiencing goes beyond normal work stress. She sat on the stool beside my bed. Your body is sounding an alarm you've been ignoring. If you continue on this path, the consequences could be serious and permanent. As if on cue, my phone buzzed for the 12th time since I'd arrived at the hospital. Claire again. I ignored it, something I'd never dared to do before. Take the rest of the week off, the doctor instructed, writing a prescription. Complete rest. No emails, no calls. Your body needs to reset. I nodded, though we both knew I wouldn't follow her advice. I couldn't. Claire was already furious about my dramatic episode, as she called it in a text. Missing a whole week would be career suicide. Kate picked me up from the hospital, her face tight with worry and something else, anger. This has to stop, Jess, she said as we drove home. You can't keep living like this. It's killing you. It was just a panic attack, I said weakly. Stress happens in every job. Does every boss call you 6 times while you're in the emergency room? Kate challenged. Normal bosses would be concerned about your health, not about when you'll be back to finish a presentation. I didn't have an answer for that. Deep down, I knew she was right, but admitting it meant facing an impossible choice. My health or my career. I'd invested too much in the latter to surrender now. I took 1 day off, Tuesday, and returned to the office Wednesday morning against medical advice. Claire was coldly professional, as if my collapse had been a personal inconvenience to her. The team covered your responsibilities while you were indisposed, she informed me. Try not to fall behind again. No, how are you feeling? No, should you be back so soon? Just the clear implication that my health crisis had been an inconvenience and a choice. That afternoon, she called me into her office and closed the door. Jessica, I'm concerned, she began, her voice taking on that artificial softness I'd come to dread. This incident has raised questions about your ability to handle pressure. My heart sank. Here it came, the punishment for showing weakness. The executive team needs to know they can count on their senior staff, she continued, especially as we approach the merger announcement. Wait, merger? This was the first I'd heard of it. Claire noticed my confusion and smiled thinly. Yes, we're announcing next month. Meridian is merging with Archer Publishing. It's been in the works for months. My mind raced. A merger meant restructuring, redundancies, layoffs. Suddenly, my panic attack had potentially devastating timing. I've been advocating for you, Claire said, examining her manicure. But incidents like Mondays make it difficult. The Archer executives are looking for stability, not emotional fragility. The threat was clear. Get it together, or you'll be first on the chopping block when the merger happens. I understand, I said, my voice hollow. It won't happen again. Good, she nodded. Because I'd hate to lose you, Jessica. You're like family to me. The word family in her mouth made my skin crawl. Families don't deliberately hurt each other. Families don't exploit weaknesses. Families don't threaten abandonment when you're already down. That night, I couldn't sleep despite the prescription the doctor had given me. The merger news had raised the stakes impossibly higher. I couldn't afford to lose this job, not with publishing houses downsizing everywhere. Not with my student loans and New York rent. Not with my resume still too thin to land something comparable. So I pushed through. The panic attacks continued, but I got better at hiding them. I'd excuse myself to the bathroom when I felt one coming, ride it out in a stall, splash cold water on my face, and return to my desk as if nothing had happened. I started taking the anti-anxiety medication the doctor prescribed, though it made me feel foggy. I drank more coffee to counteract the fog, which triggered more anxiety. It was a vicious cycle. Sleep became a distant memory. I'd lie awake until 3 or 4 a.m., heart racing, mind churning through worst-case scenarios, then drag myself out of bed at 5:30 to prepare for another day. When I did sleep, I had nightmares about work, missing deadlines, losing important files, showing up to meetings unprepared while Claire watched with that disappointed smile. The physical symptoms multiplied. Hair falling out in the shower, persistent low-grade fever, constant headaches, a rash across my chest that wouldn't go away, no matter what cream I applied. My immune system crashed. I caught every cold and stomach bug that circulated through the office. But I kept going. I had no choice. Or at least, that's what I told myself. 3 weeks after my first panic attack, I found myself in a one-on-one with Claire, reviewing the quarterly numbers. She was in a particularly vicious mood, having just come from a meeting with the CFO. These projections are completely unrealistic, she snapped, throwing my report across the desk. Have you even looked at the market trends? This is amateur work, Jessica. I expected better. Something in me finally snapped. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or the medication, or the constant state of fight or flight I'd been living in for months. Whatever the cause, words started pouring out before I could stop them. I've been working 60-hour weeks for months, I said, my voice trembling. I haven't had a weekend off since July. I've missed my nephew's birthday, canceled my dentist appointments 3 times, and lost 15 pounds because I barely have time to eat. And you're calling me an amateur because I didn't revise projections you never told me needed revision. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed. No one spoke to her this way. Ever. If you find the workload unmanageable, perhaps this isn't the right position for you, she said icily. I need someone who can handle pressure without complaining. This isn't pressure, I continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. This is abuse. You change expectations without telling me, take credit for my work, isolate me from colleagues, and punish me for getting sick from the stress you cause. That's not leadership. It's psychological torture. The room felt deadly silent. Claire's face hardened into a mask I'd never seen before, pure, calculated rage. I think you should take the rest of the day off, she said in a dangerously soft voice. "You're clearly not in a professional mindset right now. We'll discuss your future at Meridian tomorrow morning." The threat was unmistakable. I had just talked myself out of a job I'd sacrificed everything for, a job I couldn't afford to lose. But instead of panic, I felt a strange, floating sensation, as if I were watching the scene from somewhere outside my body. I gathered my things and left without another word. In the elevator down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with an email from HR requesting a meeting the next morning. It was happening. I was being fired. I should have been devastated. Instead, stepping onto the street in the middle of a workday, I took my first full breath in months. Whatever happened tomorrow, one thing was certain: I couldn't continue living this way. Something had to change, even if that something was me. What I didn't realize was that my body had already made the decision my mind was still wrestling with. That night, the true breaking point would arrive, and it would come with flashing lights and a siren. I never made it to that HR meeting. After leaving Meridian, I walked for hours through the city with no destination in mind, my phone buzzing periodically with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. Twilight settled over Manhattan as I found myself in Washington Square Park, watching students and tourists move about with an energy I couldn't remember feeling. I called my sister, Amy, something I hadn't done in weeks. Her surprised voice, when she answered, made my throat tighten with guilt. "Jess! Everything okay? You never called during work hours." "I think I just got fired," I said, the words sounding strange in my mouth. "Or I quit. I'm not sure which. What happened?" The alarm in her voice made me realize how unusual this was for me, the perfectionist, the achiever, the one who never rocked the boat. I tried to explain, but the story came out fragmented and chaotic. The panic attacks, Claire's manipulation, the isolation, the merger, my outburst. As I spoke, a wave of dizziness washed over me, and I sat heavily on a park bench. "Jess, are you still there?" Amy's voice sounded distant. "I don't feel right," I managed to say. The dizziness was getting worse, and now there was a strange pressure in my chest, like someone sitting on it. "Something's wrong. Where are you exactly?" Amy's nurse training kicked in, her voice shifting from concerned to clinical. "Jess, I need you to be specific." I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't form. The pressure in my chest intensified, radiating down my left arm. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This wasn't anxiety. This was something else. "Can't breathe," I gasped into the phone. "Jess, listen to me." Amy's voice was urgent now. "I'm calling 911 to your location. Stay on the line. This could be a panic attack, but we're not taking chances." The next few minutes blurred together. A woman walking her dog stopped to help. My phone passed to her as I doubled over on the bench, unable to catch my breath. Sirens in the distance. Paramedics asking questions I could barely answer. The strange detachment as they loaded me into an ambulance, oxygen mask on my face, electrodes on my chest. "Is it my heart?" I managed to ask as we sped through traffic. "We're going to find out," the paramedic replied noncommittally. "Your blood pressure is extremely elevated. Have you been under unusual stress lately?" I almost laughed through the oxygen mask. Unusual stress? No. Just the constant, crushing, everyday stress I'd been living with for nearly a year. The stress I'd normalized until it became my baseline. The stress that had become so much a part of me that I couldn't recognize it as abnormal anymore. In the emergency room, my second visit in a month, doctors ruled out a heart attack but diagnosed acute hypertensive crisis. My blood pressure was dangerously high, putting me at risk for stroke or heart damage. Additional tests revealed elevated liver enzymes, severe dehydration, and electrolyte imbalances consistent with prolonged stress and poor self-care. "We're admitting you," the ER doctor told me. "Your body is essentially in revolt. This isn't something we can patch up and send home. You need monitoring and intervention." As they wheeled me to a room, my phone, retrieved from my purse by a kind nurse, lit up with Claire's name. A text message. Meeting with HR moved to 9 a.m. sharp. Punctuality is expected. The absurdity of it. Me lying in a hospital bed while Claire demanded punctuality as if nothing had happened, broke something loose inside me. I started laughing, then crying, then both at once until a concerned nurse adjusted my 4 medication to help me calm down. I spent 3 days in that hospital room. 3 days disconnected from emails, texts, and calls. 3 days where my only responsibility was to let my body begin the slow process of recovery. 3 days to think about how I'd arrived at this point. Amy flew in from Chicago and camped out in the uncomfortable chair beside my bed. When she stepped out to get coffee on the second day, I used her phone to check my email. There it was, a formal termination letter from Meridian HR citing unprofessional conduct and inability to meet the demands of the position. I'd been fired while unconscious in a hospital bed. What surprised me wasn't the firing itself, but my reaction to it. The relief I felt was overwhelming. No more walking on eggshells. No more impossible deadlines. No more Claire. The career I'd sacrificed everything for was gone, and all I felt was relief. When Amy returned, she found me crying again. "Is it the job?" she asked, setting down her coffee. I nodded. "I got fired." "Those bastards," she muttered, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling Dad's lawyer." "No," I said, surprising myself. "Let it go. I don't want to fight for a job that was killing me." Amy stared at me for a long moment. "Who are you, and what have you done with my sister?" I smiled weakly. "I think I'm finding her again." On the third day, Dr. Patel, a staff psychiatrist, came to see me before discharge. She sat by my bed and asked questions no doctor had ever asked me before. Not just about my symptoms, but about my life, my relationships, my work, my dreams and disappointments. "What you've experienced is workplace trauma," she explained after listening to my story. "It's as real as any other form of trauma, though often less recognized. Your body's reaction, the panic attacks, the hypertension, the physical symptoms, these are normal responses to abnormal circumstances." "I should have been stronger," I said, still unable to let go of the idea that my collapse represented personal failure. Dr. Patel shook her head firmly. "This isn't about strength. The strongest person in the world will break if placed under constant, unpredictable stress with no recovery time. Your brain was in constant fight or flight mode for nearly a year. No one can sustain that indefinitely." She recommended ongoing therapy and medication to help manage the anxiety and depression that had settled in. She used words like recovery and healing, terms I'd never associated with a job situation. "What happens now?" I asked as our session drew to a close. "I've lost my job, probably my reputation in the industry. I'm sitting on 2 months' worth of savings and a mountain of student loans. I've spent a year sacrificing everything for a career that's now in shambles." Dr. Patel considered me carefully. "Now you rebuild," she said simply. "But this time, you build a life that includes your health and well-being as non-negotiable foundations." It sounded impossible. My entire identity had been wrapped up in my career, my professional success. Who was I without that? What was left when that was stripped away? As Amy drove me back to my apartment from the hospital, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Jessica, it's Tyler. Heard what happened through the grapevine. When you're ready to talk, I have some information about Claire you should know. You weren't the first, and unless someone speaks up, you won't be the last." I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down. Recovery first. Justice later. For the first time in a year, I was putting myself first. The apartment was quiet when we arrived. Kate was at work, but she'd left a note on the counter. "Whatever you need, I'm here. No questions asked. Welcome home." Home. A concept that had become foreign to me. This apartment had been merely a place to shower and occasionally sleep between work shifts. Now, I needed to relearn what home meant. What life meant outside the walls of Meridian Publishing. Who Jessica was when she wasn't Claire's assistant. I had no idea where to begin. But as I settled onto the couch while Amy made tea in the kitchen, I realized something important. For the first time in months, the knot in my stomach was gone. Recovery wasn't linear. That's what my therapist, Diane, told me during our first session, a week after my hospital discharge. There will be good days and bad days. The goal isn't to erase what happened, but to integrate it into your story without letting it define you. The first month was the hardest. Physically, my body was healing, my blood pressure stabilized with medication, the rash across my chest faded, and I could finally sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch. But mentally, I was a mess. I'd wake up in a panic at 4 a.m., convinced I'd missed a deadline. I'd reach for my phone automatically, expecting Claire's angry messages. I'd feel guilty for wasting time when I wasn't working every minute of the day. Once, I had a full-blown panic attack in the grocery store because I couldn't decide which brand of pasta to buy. My decision-making abilities had atrophied after months of having every choice criticized and second-guessed. Your brain is rewiring itself, Diane explained. For nearly a year, it operated in a constant state of threat response. Those neural pathways don't disappear overnight. Amy stayed for 2 weeks, cooking meals I barely ate and gently coaxing me out of the apartment for short walks. Kate adjusted her work schedule to be home more often, claiming she needed a mental health semester too. I knew they were worried I might hurt myself, though neither said it directly. The thought had crossed my mind in my darkest moments, not because I wanted to die, but because I couldn't imagine how to live with this new reality. My parents wanted me to move back to Ohio, to the safety of my childhood bedroom and home-cooked meals. The old Jessica would have seen that as defeat. The new Jessica was too exhausted to care about appearances. But something kept me in New York. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, or maybe the dawning realization that running away wouldn't solve the underlying issues I needed to face. Financial realities set in quickly. My savings would cover rent and expenses for maybe 2 months. I filed for unemployment benefits, but New York living costs would quickly outpace that income. The pressure to find another job mounted daily, but the thought of walking into another office, answering to another boss, meeting new deadlines, it triggered immediate anxiety. Take a temporary job outside publishing, Diane suggested. Something low stress while you heal. The pressure to immediately replace your career is adding to your trauma response. So I did something I'd never imagined doing with my master's degree in English literature. I became a dog walker. The agency was desperate for weekday walkers, the hours were flexible, and the dogs didn't care about my employment gap or my publishing credentials. They just wanted walks and treats and affection, things I could provide even in my broken state. There was something profoundly healing about those walks. The simple rhythm of moving through the city with a golden retriever or a corgi trotting beside me. The focus on a creature's needs that weren't my own. The impossibility of checking emails while managing a leash. For a few hours each day, I was forced to be present in my body, to notice the changing leaves in the park, to breathe fresh air instead of the recycled oxygen of an office building. 3 weeks after my hospitalization, I finally met Tyler for coffee. He'd been checking in periodically, never pushing, just letting me know he was available when I felt ready. I almost canceled twice, partly from anxiety, partly from shame at having him see me in this diminished state. "You look better," he said when I arrived, which was clearly a polite lie. I'd lost more weight, my clothes hung loose, and the dark circles under my eyes had become a permanent feature. "You don't have to do that," I said, managing a small smile. "I know I look like hell." "You look like someone who survived hell," he corrected. "There's a difference." He brought a folder with him, which he placed on the table between us. "After I left Meridian, I started connecting with other former employees," he explained. "People who'd worked directly under Claire over the past 5 years. There's a pattern, Jess. A clear, documented pattern. The folder contains statements from 11 former Meridian employees, all describing experiences eerily similar to mine. The initial excitement of working with a publishing legend. The gradual increase in impossible demands. The isolation tactics. The public humiliation and private manipulation. The health consequences, anxiety, depression, insomnia, weight changes, stress-induced illnesses. Amanda Henderson had a miscarriage she attributes to the stress, Tyler said quietly, pointing to one statement. David Chin developed such severe ulcers he needed surgery. Marianne Wilson checked herself into a mental health facility after her doctor diagnosed her with PTSD. I felt a strange combination of horror and vindication as I read through the accounts. It hadn't been my imagination. It wasn't my weakness or inability to handle the pace. Claire was systematically abusing employees, breaking them down psychologically and physically, then discarding them when they finally collapsed. "Why doesn't anyone stop her?" I asked, closing the folder when the details became too overwhelming. 3 people filed HR complaints, Tyler replied. All were quietly let go with severance packages that included NDAs. Claire brings in big authors and prestige projects. The company protects her. So what's the point of showing me this? My voice cracked with fatigue and frustration. I'm already out. I already lost everything. Tyler leaned forward. Because you have something none of these other people had, Jess. Medical documentation. Hospital records proving the direct connection between workplace conditions and physical harm. And most importantly, you were fired while in the hospital for a condition directly caused by work stress. That's not just unethical, it's potentially illegal. I can't fight Meridian, I said, shaking my head. They have an army of lawyers. I can barely get through a day of dog walking without needing a nap. You don't have to decide anything today, Tyler assured me. Just take the folder. Read through it when you're stronger. And know that if you ever decide to come forward, you won't be standing alone. I took the folder home, but didn't open it again for weeks. The idea of revisiting the trauma, of potentially facing Claire again, was still too overwhelming. Instead, I focused on the daily routines my therapist had helped me establish. Morning meditation, dog walking, therapy twice weekly, support group for workplace trauma survivors on Thursday evenings. Small, manageable meals, 8 hours in bed, even if I couldn't sleep the whole time. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. I could go a full day without thinking about Claire. I could walk past a bookstore without having a panic response to seeing Meridian titles in the window. I could make simple decisions without second-guessing myself endlessly. I gained back 5 pounds. My hair stopped falling out in the shower. 6 weeks after leaving Meridian, I received an unexpected email from Eliza Winters, a literary agent I'd worked with on several projects. She'd heard I was taking a sabbatical, the polite industry euphemism for my breakdown and firing, and wondered if I'd be interested in some freelance editing work. Nothing high pressure, she wrote. Just manuscript evaluations for new writers I'm considering. Work from home, flexible deadlines. I always valued your editorial eye, and frankly, several authors have asked specifically for you. It was a small lifeline back to the work I'd once loved before Claire had poisoned it. The part of publishing that had drawn me in initially, the words on the page, the shaping of stories, the nurturing of new voices. No office politics. No impossible deadlines. No Claire looking over my shoulder, changing requirements without warning. I accepted the offer but set firm boundaries, something the old Jessica would never have done. I would take on one manuscript at a time. I would set realistic turnaround times. I would not work evenings or weekends. Eliza agreed without hesitation. That first manuscript, a historical novel set in 1920s Paris, rekindled something I thought had died inside me, passion for the written word. I found myself genuinely absorbed in the story, making thoughtful notes, identifying strengths and weaknesses. For the first time in over a year, I was doing work that energized rather than depleted me. When I submitted the evaluation to Eliza, 3 days ahead of my self-imposed deadline, she replied with effusive thanks and an immediate offer of another project. "This is exactly why authors ask for you," she wrote. Insightful, respectful, and actually helpful feedback. Most editors just go through the motions. Something shifted inside me with those words of appreciation. Claire had spent a year convincing me that nothing I did was good enough, that I was perpetually failing to meet expectations, that my work was mediocre at best. Here was evidence to the contrary, evidence that I had value, skill, and something meaningful to contribute. That night, for the first time since my hospitalization, I opened Tyler's folder again and read through the statements more carefully. Names and details differed, but the pattern was unmistakable. Claire Davidson wasn't just a demanding boss. She was a workplace predator who had caused documented harm to at least a dozen people. And according to Tyler's latest update, she had a new assistant, a bright-eyed recent graduate named Zoe who had been with her for just 2 months. Already, Tyler reported, Zoe was staying late, looking exhausted in meetings, and had canceled plans with friends 3 weekends in a row to handle urgent work requests. The cycle was beginning again. Another young woman was being systematically broken down, her boundaries eroded, her health sacrificed at the altar of Claire's demands. Unless someone broke the silence, Zoe would likely end up where I had been, or worse. I picked up my phone and called Tyler. "I'm ready," I said when he answered. "Tell me what I need to do." The path ahead would be difficult, I knew that. Taking on Meridian, and Claire would require strength I wasn't sure I had yet. But something else was becoming clear to me. Healing wasn't just about recovering what I had lost. It was about preventing others from losing it too. For the first time since my collapse, I had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. I had a chance to turn my trauma into protection for others. And in that purpose, I found something I'd been missing for months: hope. It's not about winning a lawsuit, Marlene Torres explained, her voice steady and reassuring. It's about breaking the silence and creating accountability. Marlene was an employment attorney who specialized in workplace abuse cases. Her office was small but warm, with plants on every surface and framed testimonials from former clients covering one wall. Tyler had connected us through his network of Claire's former victims. Meridian will try to silence you, she continued, reviewing my medical records and the termination letter. They'll offer a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. Most people take it because they need the money and want to move on. Is that what you're recommending? I asked, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. The thought of accepting money to remain silent felt like another form of complicity. I'm not recommending anything yet, Marlene replied. I'm explaining your options. A settlement might be the right choice for your financial health and mental well-being. But there are other paths. Those other paths involved filing formal complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It meant documenting Claire's pattern of behavior and Meridian's failure to address it despite multiple reports. It meant being prepared for a lengthy legal battle against a powerful company with deep pockets. They'll attack your credibility, Marlene warned. They'll say you couldn't handle the job, that you were emotionally unstable before you started working there, that your health issues were pre-existing. Are you prepared for that? 3 months earlier, I wouldn't have been. But something had shifted in me during those weeks of slow recovery. The shame I'd carried, the belief that my breakdown was a personal failure, had begun to dissolve as I recognized the systematic nature of the abuse. Yes, I said, surprised by my own certainty. I'm ready. Marlene smiled. Then let's get to work. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I gathered my medical records, including the emergency room visits and psychiatric evaluations. I documented every incident I could remember with Claire, creating a timeline of escalating behaviors. I connected with 3 other former Meridian employees who were willing to provide statements about similar experiences. Meanwhile, my freelance editing work continued to grow. Eliza sent a steady stream of manuscripts my way, and word began to spread among agents that I was available for independent projects. It wasn't a full income yet, but combined with dog walking, it kept me financially afloat while allowing me to work on my terms. No office politics, no toxic bosses, no sacrifice weekends. My health continued to improve, though setbacks were common. Some days, I could barely leave the apartment, paralyzed by anxiety about the legal process ahead. Other days, I felt a surge of energetic purpose, researching workplace abuse statistics and connecting with advocacy organizations. My therapist reminded me that healing wasn't linear. Progress would come with valleys and peaks. 8 weeks after my meeting with Marlene, we filed formal complaints with both the EEOC and OSHA. The response from Meridian was swift and predictable. They offered a settlement with a strict non-disclosure agreement. It's a substantial offer, Marlene noted, showing me the figure. They're scared. The amount would cover nearly a year of living expenses in New York, a significant financial cushion as I rebuilt my career. But it came with complete silence about what had happened. I thought about Zoe, Claire's new assistant, who according to Tyler's updates was already showing signs of stress and exhaustion. I thought about the next person after her, and the one after that. I thought about the culture of silence that allowed abusers like Claire to move from victim to victim without consequences. No, I decided. I'm not signing an NDA. Marlene looked concerned. Are you sure? This isn't a decision to make lightly. I'm sure, I replied. My voice is not for sale. 2 days later, Eliza called me with unexpected news. I just got off the phone with Lauren Bennett, she said, referring to a well-known editor at HarperCollins. She's heard about your independent work and asked if you might be interested in a part-time editorial position. 3 days a week, mostly remote. It's for their new digital-first imprint. It was the first formal job offer I'd received since Meridian, and it came with a surprising lack of anxiety. The part-time, mostly remote nature of the position felt manageable. The company had a good reputation for work-life balance. And most importantly, it would provide stability without requiring me to abandon my freelance projects or the legal case. There's one more thing, Eliza added. Lauren specifically mentioned that she's been following the whispers about Meridian's toxic culture. She respects what you're doing. I accepted the position, starting at just 2 days a week with an agreement to reassess after 3 months. My first day at HarperCollins offered a striking contrast to my Meridian experience, a thoughtful onboarding process, clear expectations, and a team meeting where my new manager explicitly stated that emergencies were rare in publishing and weekend work was discouraged. Meanwhile, our legal case progressed slowly but steadily. 3 more former Meridian employees came forward after hearing about our complaint, strengthening the pattern evidence. Meridian's lawyers attempted to dismiss the case, arguing that high-pressure environments were standard in the industry and that my health issues were not their responsibility. The turning point came 4 months into the process, when Zoe herself reached out to Marlene. She had been hospitalized for exhaustion and severe dehydration after working 36 hours straight to meet a deadline Claire had moved up without warning. She was ready to speak about her experience, and she was still employed at Meridian. With a current employee willing to testify about ongoing abuse, our case gained significant leverage. Meridian's legal team requested a mediation session, which Marlene viewed as a positive sign. "They're getting nervous," she explained, "especially with the merger still being finalized. This kind of publicity could affect their stock price." The day before the mediation, Tyler organized a dinner at his apartment with several former Meridian employees who had shared their stories. Some I knew from my time there, others had left before I arrived. As we sat around his dining table, sharing pizza and experiences, I was struck by the similarities in our stories, and by how much healthier everyone looked away from Claire's influence. "I couldn't sleep more than 3 hours a night for a year after I left," Amanda shared. "My doctor put me on medication for PTSD. I developed stress-induced eczema all over my body," Michael added. "It disappeared 2 months after I quit. I miss my mother's final days because Claire wouldn't approve the time off," David said quietly. "That's something I can never get back." One by one, each person described the physical and emotional toll of working under Claire and the relief that came with escape. But there was something else in the room, too. Lingering shame, the feeling that somehow we had failed rather than been failed by our employer. Near the end of the evening, Anna, who had worked for Claire 5 years earlier, raised her glass in a toast. "To Jessica," she said, "for being brave enough to say what we all felt but were too scared to express. This wasn't normal. This wasn't okay. And it wasn't our fault." As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a surge of emotion, not the paralyzing anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long, but something warmer and more empowering. Solidarity. Community. The knowledge that in speaking my truth, I had helped others recognize theirs. The mediation the next day was intense but productive. Marlene was a fierce advocate, presenting the collected testimonies, medical records, and documentation of Claire's pattern of abuse. Meridian's lawyers initially tried to minimize the claims but grew more subdued as the evidence mounted. By late afternoon, we had reached an agreement, a financial settlement without a non-disclosure provision, mandatory leadership training throughout Meridian's management structure, and most importantly, an independent review of all complaints against Claire Davidson, past and present. "It's not perfect," Marlene acknowledged as we left the mediation, "but it's a significant step. They know they're being watched now, and other employees know there's a path to accountability." As I walked home through the early evening streets of Manhattan, I felt lighter than I had in over a year. The legal battle wasn't fully resolved. There would be paperwork, potential appeals, and the independent review to navigate, but something fundamental had shifted. I had spoken my truth. I had been heard, and in doing so, I had helped create space for others to speak their truths too. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Thank you for everything. Meeting with HR tomorrow about a transfer to another department. Couldn't have done it without knowing I wasn't alone or imagining things." One small victory in a culture that too often protected abusers at the expense of their victims. But it was something. It was a beginning. That night, I slept a full 8 hours without medication for the first time since leaving Meridian. When I woke, the first thought in my mind wasn't dread or anxiety about the day ahead. It was a simple recognition. I was reclaiming my life, one day at a time. And in helping others find their voices, I had rediscovered my own. 1 year after my collapse in Meridian's conference room, I stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom, looking out at a sea of attentive faces. The American Psychological Association had invited me to speak at their annual conference as part of a panel on workplace trauma and recovery. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the microphone, but my voice was steady as I began. A year ago, I couldn't stand in a grocery store without having a panic attack, I told the audience. Today, I'm standing before hundreds of people, sharing a story I once thought would destroy me if anyone knew it. That transformation didn't happen by accident or through simple passage of time. It happened because I finally recognized that what I had experienced wasn't normal, wasn't my fault, and wasn't something I had to endure in silence. The journey to that podium had been neither quick nor easy. The settlement with Meridian had provided financial stability, but money couldn't heal the psychological wounds inflicted by months of systematic abuse. That healing came through therapy, community, and ultimately, through transforming my pain into purpose. 3 months after the mediation, the independent review of complaints against Claire Davidson had been completed. The findings confirmed what we already knew, a pattern of psychological abuse spanning years, affecting dozens of employees, with documented physical and mental health consequences. Claire was placed on administrative leave while Meridian's board decided her fate. The publishing industry, small, insular, and gossip-driven, buzzed with the news. Some defended Claire, attributing her behavior to the pressures of a competitive industry or dismissing her victims as too sensitive. But more voices rose in support of those who had come forward, sharing their own experiences of toxic work environments and abusive leadership. What had begun as my personal health crisis had sparked a broader conversation about workplace culture and accountability. Industry publications ran features on recognizing workplace abuse. HR departments across publishing houses reviewed their complaint procedures. Employee resource groups focused on mental health and work-life balance sprang up in companies that had previously celebrated burnout as a badge of honor. My own life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days after my hospitalization. My part-time position at HarperCollins had evolved into a role developing their new wellness initiative, creating policies and resources to support employee mental health. I maintained a small freelance editing business on the side, working with authors I genuinely connected with on projects I believed in. More surprisingly, I had become an accidental advocate. What started with sharing my story for the legal case had expanded to blog posts, interviews, and speaking engagements focused on recognizing and responding to workplace toxicity. I'd connected with workplace safety organizations, mental health advocates, and employment attorneys to develop resources for others experiencing what I had. The most insidious aspect of workplace abuse, I continued in my speech, is how it isolates you. Your abuser convinces you that you're the problem, too weak, too sensitive, too demanding, too incompetent. You can't see that your colleagues are experiencing the same treatment because everyone is so busy trying to survive that no one has the energy to compare notes. And that isolation is deliberate. It's a control tactic. From the audience, I could see Tyler nodding. He had become a close friend throughout this process, and his support had been invaluable. Beside him sat Zoe, who had transferred to Meridian's audiobook division after coming forward. She was thriving under a manager who respected boundaries and recognized her talent. Breaking that isolation was the first step in my healing, I explained. Learning that I wasn't alone, that what I had experienced was part of a pattern, gave me the perspective I needed to understand that this wasn't my personal failure. It was a systemic problem with identifiable causes and solutions. After the panel, a line formed of people wanting to share their stories. A young man who had developed debilitating migraines working under a verbally abusive supervisor. A woman who had been gaslighted by her manager for months until she questioned her own competence and reality. A human resources professional struggling to address toxic leadership in her organization. Each story reinforced what I had come to understand. Workplace abuse wasn't rare, it wasn't trivial, and its health consequences were very real. But each person who recognized it, named it, and refused to normalize it helped shift the culture that allowed it to flourish. Back in my hotel room that evening, I received an email that stopped my breath for a moment. The sender was Rebecca Williams, Meridian's new chief operating officer, appointed after the merger with Archer Publishing. "I wanted to personally inform you before the public announcement tomorrow," she wrote. Following the independent review and subsequent investigation, Claire Davidson's employment with Meridian has been terminated. The board has also approved a comprehensive overhaul of our management training and HR protocols, drawing directly from the recommendations in the investigator's report. It had taken a year, multiple victims coming forward, medical documentation, legal action, and significant public pressure, but finally, there were consequences. Claire's removal wouldn't undo the harm she had caused to dozens of people over the years, but it would prevent future harm. And the policy changes might protect employees from similar abusers in the future. I forwarded the email to Tyler and our growing network of former Meridian employees with a simple message. It mattered. Speaking of mattered, responses poured in throughout the evening. Relief, vindication, tears. For many, this closure represented a significant step in their own healing journeys. Later that night, I called Kate, who had remained my steadfast roommate and friend throughout this tumultuous year. "They fired her," I said when she answered. "About damn time," Kate replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "How does it feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Complicated," I finally answered. "I'm glad she can't hurt anyone else at Meridian, but I know she'll probably land another executive position somewhere else. The system that enables people like her is bigger than one company or one industry." "So the fight continues," Kate said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I agreed, "but differently now. Less from a place of personal healing and more from a place of systemic change." The next morning, I woke to dozens of messages responding to the news of Claire's termination. Among them was one from Dr. Patel, the hospital psychiatrist who had first named what I was experiencing as workplace trauma. "I hope this brings some closure," she wrote. "But remember, your healing journey is distinct from any external outcome. Your worth was never defined by this fight, and your recovery doesn't end with this victory. Be gentle with yourself in the days ahead." It was a timely reminder. Throughout this year of advocacy and action, I had sometimes fallen back into measuring my value by external achievements, the very mindset that had made me vulnerable to Claire's manipulation in the first place. True healing meant recognizing my inherent worth beyond any professional accomplishment or public recognition. As I packed my suitcase to return to New York, I reflected on the distance I had traveled, not just from the conference to home, but from the broken person in that hospital bed to the woman I was becoming. The journey wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. Trauma leaves permanent marks. But those marks had become part of my strength rather than just evidence of my wounding. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. "Coffee with Maya, 2 p.m. tomorrow." Maya was a young editor who had reached out after reading an article about my experience. She was struggling in what sounded like a toxic work environment and had asked for guidance. A year ago, I wouldn't have had anything to offer her. Now I had both wisdom from my experience and connections to resources that could help. This was the unexpected gift that had emerged from my darkest moments, the ability to transform my pain into protection for others. Not through martyrdom or sacrifice, but through honest sharing and conscious boundary setting. By valuing my own well-being, I could help others learn to value theirs. As the plane took off, carrying me back to the life I was rebuilding, I thought about how healing often comes in unexpected ways. I hadn't healed by burying my trauma or pretending it hadn't happened. I had healed by telling my story, connecting with others who shared similar experiences, and working to create change. The scars remained. I still took medication for anxiety. I still had nightmares about Claire occasionally. I still felt a flutter of panic when receiving unexpected feedback or criticism. But these remnants of trauma no longer controlled my life or defined my identity. I had learned the most important lesson of all: no job was worth my health. No career achievement was worth my peace of mind. And no amount of professional success could compensate for the loss of my most basic needs: safety, respect, and well-being. It was a lesson I was determined to share with anyone who would listen. 2 years to the day after my collapse in Meridian's conference room, I sat in my small home office, putting the finishing touches on the manuscript that had consumed the past 18 months of my life. Toxic, Recognizing and Surviving Workplace Abuse wasn't the book I had ever imagined writing, but it had poured out of me with an urgency I couldn't ignore. The book combined my personal story with research on workplace psychological abuse, interviews with other survivors, expert insights from psychologists and employment attorneys, and practical resources for those trapped in toxic work environments. HarperCollins had offered me a contract after seeing early chapters, recognizing the growing demand for resources on workplace mental health. As I reviewed the final paragraph of the conclusion, I reflected on how much had changed since those dark days at Meridian. Claire Davidson had indeed landed another executive position at a smaller publishing house 6 months after her termination, but her reputation had followed her. When employees at her new company discovered her history, they organized and demanded accountability measures. The industry was watching now, aware of the pattern. Her power to harm had been significantly diminished by the light shone on her behavior. Meridian had undergone a genuine transformation under Rebecca Williams' leadership. The company now required regular management training on psychological safety, maintained multiple channels for reporting workplace concerns, and had implemented mental health resources for all employees. They'd even invited me to consult on their workplace wellness initiative, an irony not lost on either of us. My own career had evolved in unexpected ways. I still edited books, both at HarperCollins and through my freelance business, but my work had expanded to include consulting on workplace culture, speaking at conferences, and facilitating support groups for survivors of workplace abuse. The trauma that had once felt like my greatest shame had become the foundation of my most meaningful work. More importantly, my health had stabilized. I still managed anxiety and occasionally experienced stress-related symptoms, but I had developed tools to recognize early warning signs before they escalated into crises. I practiced firm boundaries around work hours, took regular mental health days without guilt, and had built a support network that helped me maintain perspective when old patterns of thinking emerged. I typed the final words of my manuscript, saved the document, and emailed it to my editor with a sense of completion that went beyond the project itself. This book represented the final transformation of my experience from personal tragedy to public resource. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Drinks tonight to celebrate submission day? The whole crew's coming." The crew had started as a small support group of former Meridian employees and had evolved into a tight-knit friend group bound by shared experience in recovery. Some, like Tyler, had moved on to new publishing positions with healthier cultures. Others, like me, had created unconventional career paths that prioritized well-being alongside professional growth. All had been instrumental in my healing journey. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, closing my laptop and stretching. My apartment, a new one I had moved into 6 months earlier, was filled with afternoon sunlight. It was smaller than my previous place but felt more like home, with plants on every windowsill and walls covered in framed photos of friends and family. No more working until midnight. No more sacrificing weekends. No more measuring my worth by my productivity. As I prepared to meet my friends, I thought about the questions I was most frequently asked when speaking about workplace abuse. How do you know when it's time to leave? How do you rebuild your life afterward? How do you prevent it from happening again? The answers weren't simple, but they had become clearer to me through my own journey and the stories of others I had collected. You know it's time to leave when the job costs more than it gives, when your health, relationships, and fundamental well-being are being sacrificed for a paycheck or a title. When Sunday evenings fill you with dread. When you can't remember the last time you felt joy or peace. When your body is sending alarm signals your mind keeps ignoring. You rebuild by accepting that recovery isn't linear and doesn't happen overnight. By finding community with others who understand. By working with mental health professionals who recognize workplace trauma as legitimate. By reclaiming your narrative and recognizing that vulnerability is not weakness. By forgiving yourself for not leaving sooner. You prevent it from happening again by knowing your non-negotiables and recognizing red flags early. By understanding that no job is worth your health. By believing your body when it tells you something is wrong. By valuing yourself enough to walk away from environments that diminish you, no matter how prestigious they might appear. These weren't just lessons for workplace abuse survivors. They were wake-up calls for a culture that had normalized burnout, celebrated unhealthy work habits, and confused exploitation with ambition. A culture that needed to change, and was beginning to, one story, one policy, one boundary at a time. At the bar that evening, surrounded by friends who had walked similar paths, I raised my glass in a toast. To speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, I said. To boundaries that protect, rather than walls that isolate. To healing that becomes helping. And to the strength we found in our most broken places. Glasses clinked as murmurs of agreement circled the table. We were the lucky ones. We had survived, found support, and reclaimed our lives. But for every one of us sitting at that table, there were thousands still trapped in toxic workplaces, believing the lie that their suffering was necessary, deserved, or simply the price of success. My book would reach some of them. My speaking engagements would reach others. Our collective advocacy might change policies and practices that would protect still more. But the most important work happened in quiet conversations, in honest answers when someone asked, "Is this normal? Or am I overreacting? Or should I just try harder?" No, it's not normal. No, you're not overreacting. No, trying harder in an abusive system only hurts you more. These were the truths I wish someone had told me before I ended up in that hospital bed. The truths I now carry for others who needed to hear them. Later that night, as I walked home through the city streets, I thought about the young woman I had been, ambitious, dedicated, willing to sacrifice everything for professional success. I didn't judge her anymore. I understood her motivations and her vulnerabilities. I recognized that her determination and work ethic were strengths that had been weaponized against her by someone who recognized how to exploit them. But I also knew what she hadn't yet learned, that no paycheck is worth your peace. No title is worth your health. No job should cost you yourself. If my collapse and recovery could help others recognize these truths before reaching their breaking points, then perhaps my suffering served a purpose beyond my own growth. Perhaps it created a small crack in the systems that enabled abuse, a crack that would widen with each new voice that joined mine. And in that possibility, I had found the meaning that transformed my trauma from something that happened to me into something that happened for a reason, not a reason that justified the abuse, but a reason that redeemed the pain it caused. As I unlocked my apartment door, I noticed an email notification on my phone. It was from a woman I'd never met who had attended one of my recent speaking events. "I gave notice today," she wrote. "After 3 years in a job that was slowly killing me, I finally found the courage to leave. Your story helped me recognize what was happening and believe I deserved better. I'm scared about the future, but for the first time in years, I can breathe." I smiled as I closed the door behind me, set my keys on the table, and kicked off my shoes. One more person breaking free. One more life reclaimed. This was why I continued to tell my story, even when it was painful. This was why I had transformed my broken places into bridges for others. This was the voice that remained when all the noise of ambition and achievement fell silent. You are worth protecting. Your health matters. Your life is more valuable than any job. It was the truth I had nearly died to learn. And it was the truth I would spend the rest of my life sharing with anyone who needed to hear it. No job is worth your life. No career is worth your soul. And no paycheck can compensate for the loss of yourself. Remember that. Believe it. And if you're in a workplace that's breaking you, physically, mentally, emotionally, find the courage to walk away. Your future self is waiting on the other side of that decision, ready to show you how much more life has to offer when you're no longer surviving a toxic workplace. I know, because I've been there. And I'm still here to tell the story. If you've ever felt crushed by a toxic job, smash that subscribe button. Your mental health deserves this community support. Hit the notification bell if you've ever worked for a boss that kept you up at night. Each subscription helps expose the workplace abuse that's silently destroying lives. Join us in creating workplaces where people aren't broken by power-hungry bosses,